don't hate the show, man. We hate ourselves because we like to imagine ourselves as these quote unquote fucking moral saints, right? And we would like to think to ourselves that I would never murder. But if we're partaking, for instance, in institutions that actively do murder, whether it be the factory farming system, the industrial factory farming system that murders, again, cows and chickens and pigs and shit for us to eat, or whether we're involved in the institutions that are actively, right now dropping bombs at people in the Middle East, or police institutions that kill people right here extrajudiciously, then guess what? We're part of that, right? That's an extension of us. And especially if we say shit like murder's bad, and then when it happens, we kind of just turn a blind eye to it, because now we become guilty of what's known as tacit consent, this idea that just by not saying something is just as powerful as by actively saying that you are in favor of something, right? I find this to be a huge issue in my ethics class in particular, because obviously it's a very ethical conversation that I'm having to begin with. But one of the things that I like to build up, especially, spoiler alert, right, for those of you who are going to take the class in the future, but revelation for those of you who are taking the class this semester, one of the things that I like to build up is this idea of how we're not as good as we like to think we are. How about that? I'll start with that. We're not as good as we think we are. We are not as moral as we think we are. We are not as just as we think we are. In fact, we are fucked up, just as fucked up as some of the most fucked up people that have ever existed in the history of the race. The likes of which that have already just broached the subject initially, your immediate reflexive response would be like, ugh, they're terrible people. And understandably so, because of the evil, terrible shit that they have done, right? However, as the course of the semester progresses, we start having conversations about shit like fucking universal healthcare, about shit like universal income, about shit like fucking food for the hungry people who can't afford to buy food, housing for the people who can't afford their housing, right? And guess what? It never ceases to surprise me that despite the fact that many of the people, if not all the people in my class, and undoubtedly many of the people who are listening to this would benefit from those very things that I just mentioned, the majority of them are always against it. They're like, what is this, some fucking pinko commie shit? Jordan Peterson was right with his cultural Marxism. Fuck my philosophy professor. This is America, goddammit. You pull yourself up by your fucking bootstraps and you make something of yourself. All right, bro. Cool. I get that argument for sure, no doubt. But let's fucking push a little bit further and let's ask ourselves, okay, we know that you as a human being need a few things just to survive. You need food, you need shelter, and you need access to basic necessities like fucking water and air. And if you are deprived of any of those, you will not live. It's that simple, okay? Now, obviously, in this capitalistic, monetized society that we find ourselves living in, you need money for all of them, right? Maybe if you're lucky, you can go into a place somewhere and get a water fountain drink, or I guess most places will offer you a free cup. Don't you fucking dare take a soda, though. Water only, motherfucker, right? And that's a courtesy that we're going to extend to you, because if you die, we can't take money from you, right? So maybe free water every now and then, but everything else in this country, man, you gotta fucking pay for that shit, dog. Obviously, this is not startling. What is startling to the students, right, is that if you can't pay for it, what happens? Well, obviously, the initial step is going to be that you find yourself homeless. Single mother of 4 kids, who the fuck cares, bitch? Pay me. Fuck you, pay me, right? Person who fell on hard times because they got hurt and they couldn't afford to go to work, bitch, I don't give a fuck. Fuck you, pay me, right? The list goes on of all the sorts of different examples. And if you can't afford to fucking pay them, they'll take it away from you, at which point you'll find yourself homeless. And when you are homeless, you will be fucking dependent on the well-being and the good, if you will, of other individuals to sustain you in some way, shape, or form. And guess what? If they don't, your ass is about this close from being fucking killed, all right? I'm not gonna say dying. I'm gonna say killed. Okay, who are you being killed by? All the motherfuckers who either actively say, "Fuck you, dog. If you can't afford this shit on your own, too bad," right? And then the ones who are guilty of tacit consent by not saying anything of it, because ideally, in this country as rich as this one, we would be able to help many people, right? But when we choose not to, we're basically telling them to fuck off, right? You die, motherfucker. Now, I'm not going to, again, going back to the previous podcast, I'm not going to outright kill you like I used to be able to do in the past days, in the Game of Thrones days, but I'm going to let you just fucking suffer and wither away and turn a blind eye until you are no longer a fucking issue, right? Hey, man, and this is the whole thing when it comes down to this Game of Thrones episode, right? When we say, for instance, this moral community, we're like, yo, the people that are not part of the moral community, we have no regard for them. And because of that, who the fuck cares what happens to them? Okay, so we ideally, most of us, we don't like to think of ourselves as being someone who would sentence someone to die, for instance. We would like to think of ourselves as an individual who would see the suffering in another and seek to try, at least in some way, shape, or form, to alleviate that suffering in as many ways as possible. But obviously, that's not really the case. And when we realize it, that shit makes us feel mad uncomfortable, right? And this is why I think most people didn't like the episode last night, because it makes them realize, like, yeah, it's easy to talk shit about the Nazis, for example, but how is what we're doing to people who can't afford to feed themselves, for instance, much of a difference? How many people die of hunger? How many people die of starvation? How many people die of not having an adequate place to live, adequate access to water, etc., right? It may not be as fucking quick as, you know, what they were doing in Germany during World War II, but this shit is exponential. This shit has not stopped. It's been going on, right? It's happening still to this day. Someone right now is dying from their lack of resources, their lack of access to resources. And we're kind of just like, man, whatever. Game of Thrones coming on next week, last episode, right? And because of that shit, man, we're just as fucking guilty, right? So we like to, going back to the episode, yeah, she killed a lot of fucking people who could, you know, a lot of seemingly innocent people, the elderly, the women, the children. But guess what? So do we every day by our neglect of them, right? We're neglecting them. So what's any different between, you know, Daenerys Stormborn coming down and fucking raining fire from the sky with fucking a dragon and killing them instantaneously, and us here just sitting down and completely fucking neglecting all the needless death and suffering that's occurring because of the choice of our actions, right? There's no difference.